Hello, fellow patriots. This is Kelly Jackson with Truthwire News, your most trusted source for news in Tennessee. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting Robert Bortins, who's CEO for Classical Conversations, a Christian homeschool out of North Carolina. Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for joining me today. And as you mentioned, as we head into general session, so of course we've got the presidential election coming up in November, but here in Tennessee, and as I think probably around most of the country, we will run into and head up to our general session in January. And there has been, again, against a very focused effort on behalf of our governor to impose school vouchers on the citizens of Tennessee. So this is a very important conversation as the grassroots, mostly as I mentioned, our largest and most predominant conservative grassroots organization, Tennessee Stands, led by Gary Humble, we managed to defeat the last initiative, but we have been promised a rematch in this next year.
Sure.
And there has been a lot of groundwork done by the establishment politicians, moneyed organizations, Governor Lee, who has waded into the races, which he's never really done before. He dipped his toe in the
Yep.
races to influence the outcomes and handpick reps who he knows will assist him in what he sees, I think, as his legacy legislation. We saw orgs like AFP and Club for Growth dump millions of dollars into our races here, which produced wins for establishment. And we lost some of our best, most reliably conservative reps and senators here in deep red Tennessee. So what led me to invite you here is a video that you put out that was shared with me about a 2-minute presentation that you gave in front of a room full of pro-voucher folks at a conference. I just found it incredibly compelling. So can you sort of tell people about this experience and the things you heard from others there in that pro-voucher crowd?
Yeah. So for us, I'm involved in a lot of different organizations, even some of these that are pushing the
Right.
school choice because one, just trying to learn about the systems, and two,
Right.
they do other things that I do approve
Right.
of.
Right.
And so the nice thing is I've been able to get in front and do different groups, and some of them haven't even ever thought about some of these arguments or why that their leaders are pushing them in these directions. And so
Right.
we were in Arizona. The organization purposely picked it because they were going to be talking about the benefits of educational choice and all of these great things. And myself and another person who was a part of it, there's maybe 200 people here. There's probably 10 people who are against school choice, 50 people are for it, and another 140 who just are going along because they don't have opinions or they haven't thought about it, or their favorite, conservative speaker has said this is a good thing.
Mhm.
And so my friend, because he had about 30 seconds in his presentation, he just said, how many of you are for universal health care? And nobody raised their hand. He goes, okay, raise your hand if you're for universal, basic income. And nobody raises their hand. And, how many of you are here for universal housing? And nobody raises their hand. And then he said, okay, who here is for universal school choice? And, probably, a third of the room like enthusiastically raises their hand. A third of the room like starts to raise their hand. And like, as they're going up, they have like this thought process that like, how was I against the first three things or this one?
Right.
That was impactful. And he
Yeah.
got a lecture from the leader of this organization. Why are you helping the Marxist school choice people? I mean, Marxist teachers unions.
Yes.
It's like Marxism is the redistribution of wealth, and you are promoting an
Right.
idea that takes money from my neighbors and gives
Yep.
it to me. And
Yep.
I should be happy because this Marxist idea is supporting me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not against I'm not for public unions. And I think teachers unions obviously spend 98% of their money towards Democrats. And
Yeah.
so it seems to be, instead of fixing education a different way, they're just
Right.
trying to hurt these teachers unions. And really what they don't understand is you have people who are privately paying for their education and people who are, compelling their neighbors to pay
Yeah.
for their education. And they want to make you as a neighbor be compelled to pay for more people's education
Right.
against your will. And of course, the interesting thing, I took, if I'm a Christian,
Right.
from a biblical worldview,
Yes.
the government nowhere in the Bible is given ownership over children, and that's including funding. So
Right.
it's the responsibility of families and the church. And I view that the educational dollar that is paid for, that is corrupted through that government redistribution of wealth,
Yes.
is the problem with our education system. I mean, we have $2 trillion in debt for college. Well, that all started with the government providing free or discounted loans to students. And
Yeah.
what happens? Quality goes up, or
Yes.
quality goes down, and prices go up.
Go up.
And that's been the case of you see these people share memes where it says, don't feed the bears, they might become reliant on humans to feed them. And it's like, and then they're like, okay, well, you're doing this I know you've shared this meme before if you're conservative, but now you're doing the exact same thing with education. And so, for my view is just, I tried to bring the Bible into it, and showing that as a Christian, it's wrong to ask other people to carry our burdens. And that, Jesus, as he got closer to city centers, he talks more about corruption. When he was away of power, he talked about free market economics, but as he got closer, he talked about the redistribution of wealth and how evil that is.
Yeah.
And so this is just another form of redistributing of wealth. And if you think about it, right now, we've got 10% of Americans proving on a daily basis you can give your kid a world-class education without taking any taxpayer dollars.
Yep.
If universal school choice becomes the law of the land, the 1% of 1% of us who refuse to be corrupted will be the only ones. I have 99.9% of Americans being educated through taxation redistribution schemes. And think about it, those people become, even if you give them a quote unquote better education and they're more conservative and you say Marxism is bad and all this stuff, if the system is founded on Marxist principles and they grow up to be voters, you might tell them that Marxism is bad, but as soon as they put two and two together, well, redistribution of wealth paid for my education, why shouldn't it pay for everybody's health care? Why shouldn't it pay for, these ideas that the far left are pushing are really just a generation of school choice educated young people away from becoming the law of the land, at which point our country is done. And so, I mean, we're literally, in my view, braiding the noose that is going to kill conservatism here in the U.S. Because we have embraced Marxism. And so we're really abandoning first principles. And, as a kind of a separatist, I believe the state should not be involved in education at all. I know the rest of the country isn't there. But if we really want people to free, we're not putting chains and different things on them. And that's exactly what the United Nations, UNESCO, their whole goal is to get everyone to adopt universal school choice. Germany, homeschooling is illegal, but they have universal school choice. They'll pay for any private school you want to go to. Sweden, basically universal school choice is the law of the land. Homeschooling is illegal. All right. And guess what they did in Sweden? First, they gave them all this money and you could teach whatever you wanted. And then a couple election cycles later, they said, okay, you have to start teaching, BLM and SED or all these, whatever the latest and great, we're going to pull your funding. And so now they've built economic structures for their schools, not based on free market principles, but based on the government creating a captured market. And so, you hear a couple lies that you hear is like, oh, this is a free market. This creates more free market choice for parents. That's a lie, because it's free market means that the parents or the person is paying for it out of their own pocket. This is a captured market, a redistributed market. The second thing that you hear is that the money follows the child. Now, I am very against this wealth gap that causes the wealth gap, welfare redistribution systems, because the student is just a pass through. You know who gets rich off it? The donors to these, or the people financing it. So there's something called class wallet. Now, class wallet's going to take anywhere from 3 to 10% of your state's school choice dollars. So you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars a year to administer these type of programs. And if it's
Yeah.
not class wallet, it'll be a different program. So those
Right.
people are going to be making hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. The people who invest in these schools. So it happens that a for-profit buys the land and builds a school and then leases it to the nonprofit. Then the nonprofit pays them rent. They get tax deductions. And the nonprofit is getting all this money from the state through these tax schemes,
Right.
while the people getting rich are the people who have funded and built these schools. And
Yeah.
so most people don't know that. That's how that works. But the same thing with even think about housing vouchers that they give to people,
Yeah.
right? Yes, it's great that those people are off the street, but it's the people who invest in those houses that are getting
Yeah.
rich.
Right.
To have this wide, unequal distribution of wealth, because the more wealth that is concentrated in the state or the federal government, the more income inequality you'll have, because unless you're willing to jump through government hoops, which a free people should not be willing to do,
Right.
you're just basically saying, unless you're willing to send the government to your neighbor's house at gunpoint, you're not going to become rich in the US. And unless you know how to manipulate that system, you're not going to become rich in the US. So we're completely abandoning anything that's related to the free market, which will just give us to corporatism, and then either fascism,
Yeah.
communism is basically going to be the end game. And for the UNESCO, the United Nations, they obviously are fine with, well, they're probably more pushing
Right.
the socialist communist direction of it, but there's definitely fascist tendencies as well.
Right. So I guess the question would be then why, because we know, like, in fact, your point, Gary Humble, who, as I mentioned, he's the director for Tennessee Stands. The way that he phrased it to people was, here in our state, the AFP came in and was telling everyone, hey, 7,000, and that's the way that the governor had structured the
Sure.
program here in Tennessee, $7,000 per child. And how it was phrased to people by Gary was, well, I've got 3 kids. So that's $21,000 per kid or per family for my family per year. Here in Tennessee, we have very, very low property taxes. So
Sure.
there's no way, as he said, there's no way I pay $21,000 worth of taxes every year. So that isn't I think the biggest thing that people keep saying is, well, it's my tax money and it's going to go to work for me.
Sure.
So how do we, other than that illustration that he gave, which is, yeah, it's 21
Mhm.
grand a year. There's no way I pay that much taxes. So what does that make it? An entitlement. How do
Yeah.
we help conservatives sort of break out of that, have a paradigm shift that school vouchers or school choice is not a
Mhm.
conservative issue? It is, in fact, a leftist progressive issue. How do we do that?
I mean, the only success I've had is one-on-one conversations and doing podcasts and making videos. Most people who are for it haven't really thought through the consequences of it.
Right.
And so it's just a lot of hard work to do that. We're not necessarily for tax credits, but if there was the least bad, the least progressive version would be
Yeah.
some sort of, tax credit where you did not pay, in our states, about 50% of our taxes go to schools.
Right.
So, a non-refundable tax credit up to 50% of your tax burden would at least you maybe keeping your own money. But at no point is this keeping your own money. You have a family of 5, you're getting $35,000 a year.
Yeah.
I'd say people go knock on your neighbor's door and tell them that you're going to throw them in jail unless they give you $1,000 to educate your kid, and see how would you do that morally. Right. And if they said, no, I would not do that. It's like, so, but you're willing to have the police confiscate your neighbor's home.
Yes.
If they don't pay their property taxes.
Right.
And so and to your point, like, it's blowing up budgets. Like, it blew up the Arizona budget. It blew up Iowa budget. A lot of these funds that the states have are leftover COVID funds. Our federal government's whatever trillions of dollars in debt.
Yeah.
Just add $1 trillion a month from now, and that will be the new number. I'm not even going to guess what it is now. So it's putting unfair burden on the next generation.
Yeah.
It's not real money. And then to your point, like, Texas is trying to abolish their property tax, because that
Oh
property
my
tax is definitely
gosh.
the most immoral taxes. But it's like, you're not going to be able to abolish your property
No,
taxes and pay for an extra 10% of students in your state suddenly being on welfare.
right.
And so it's entitlement system. And so, like, literally, if you just play this down, 5, 6 years from now, you're going to be having conservative Republicans running on increasing taxes
Yep.
to pay for more school choice. I mean,
Oh,
it's
we're already kind of seeing that in our own
yeah.
county, which Williamson County is the wealthiest county in the state of Tennessee, and 70% of our county budget already goes to our schools. Of course, one of our county commissioners calls our schools the oceanfront property of William. Like, that's why people come to Williamson County. But the fact is that, even with that much money, we had our school board arguing for an additional $10 million. And the response from one of the people that was sitting at a budget meeting who is on the school board said, well, just raise taxes. Who this person, by the way, was a Pfizer executive until recently. He was a VP for government relations for Pfizer. So you can imagine what kind of salary he made. So it's perfectly fine for him to tell everybody else, oh, just raise taxes.
Well, you got to think too, like Pfizer, right? Most of their money comes from the federal government,
Right.
and they are getting paid billions, hundreds of billions of dollars,
Yes.
where you're compelled to pay for his salary.
Yes.
And so he's able to demand, probably 25, $35 million a year, because he's convincing the government to
Yep.
take money out of your pocket
Yep.
and put it in his pocket.
Yeah.
And so he is a closet Marxist,
Yes.
um, by far, because guess what? In Marxism and communism, the rich get richer,
Yes.
because the government is going to always redistribute money to their friends.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Well, you brought up the teachers unions and being accused of being a leftist teachers union backer. That seems to be a primary accusation of some of the voices on X, like Corey DeAngelis, who seems to
yep.
be a thorn in my personal side as far as I don't engage with
Guess
him, but just
you do know that he was involved in the United Nations equality team. I think it was their
wow.
equality process. So, I mean, again, Corey, probably has the same goal in mind. Like, he's thinking that he's helping get kids out of the public school system. He's an atheist. So he doesn't care about protecting parental rights. He doesn't care about, Christian values being passed on to the next generation,
Yeah.
whatever the state or society thinks is best,
Yeah.
um, is best. And so it's just, for him, if you go look into his background and just do a few minutes, like, if you just get rid of his name, get rid of his picture, good looking guy, very eloquent, very well educated, just give his resume to someone
Yeah.
who's a conservative and say, someone with this background, would you push policy? And they'd say, this person is diametrically opposed to the worldview that I have. And
Yeah.
yet virtually every single Republican has gotten on board to this. And so
Yeah.
it's quite amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I will admit myself, my husband and I have had this conversation where because we have been so indoctrinated. I mean, I'm in my 50s, so I grew
Yeah.
up in the 80s. Republicans and conservatives, 80s and 90s, it was all about money issues, fiscal conservatism, no new taxes, all of the, oh, and by the way, school vouchers, school vouchers, school vouchers. And even he and we used to have that mindset of, well, we're already paying taxes. And the thing that I realized when we got involved in this fight is, what people forget is the second you write that check and you put it in the mailbox to the IRS, or the second they appropriate that money from your paycheck, it is no longer your money, They never
Yes.
see that as your money. It's their money, as though they produce something, like as though they're a company that produces something, and they're gifting it back to you. And I don't know
Yeah.
if anybody has ever understood a time or known a time when the government gave you money and then said, yeah, do whatever you want with it.
What exactly? And that's not a conservative value either.
No, no, it's
Because they're
not.
pushing these ideas like, oh, school choice. And guess what? There's no strings attached. I was like,
Yeah.
since when was accountability and oversight of our tax dollars not a conservative value?
Right.
And it should be.
It
like,
should
that's
be.
even scary. It's like,
Yes.
and then there's people, well, I'll take the money until there's strings and then I'll let it go. It's like, no, there's been maybe 5 people in history who have done that, and 3 of them have been killed by their government.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not something that happens. You just say, oh, well, I'll compromise here, I'll compromise there.
Yes.
Like we've heard of people who like had, because there's been different school choice things around the globe. In different manners. Like Alaska's had school choice for a long time just
Yeah.
because of their distributed model. They're just
Yeah.
distributed everywhere. They call it something else. School choice advocates won't even admit that Alaska's had school choice for 20 years
Wow.
or more. But they've actually, before we kind of knew this was on our radar, for a while there, the state of Alaska was purchasing through their program the Classical Conversations curriculum, and
Okay.
there's a lot of religious content in there. And they were actually we were getting complaints from our customers. That's how we found out that
Wow.
the religious content had either been taken out or marked through with permanent marker.
Wow.
So
Wow.
imagine, it's just like, yeah, with what we say is with the shekels come the shackles. You're not making your kids free. You're making them forever dependent on the government, and
Right.
making that part of your family's legacy is that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a compelling amount of money. Like we have a friend in Arizona, they have 7 kids, so they're giving
Mhm.
up $49,000 a year to be free. But what is your soul worth? And so,
Right.
yeah, this is I mean, really for me, I think this is the fight to save our republic,
Yeah.
and could be the last stand
Last stand.
because of the downstream implications.
Right.
I mean, if you think about a pure voting perspective in America today,
Yeah.
if you look at the demographics, families, like if you're in the family that's together,
Right.
I think like 60% of them vote Republican and 40% vote Democrat.
Yeah.
If you look at welfare recipients, it's like the exact opposite. Like 60% of them are voting Democrat and
Right.
40% are voting Republican. And so you are taking this family unit who's a strong Republican voting bloc and giving them welfare markers. So now, if that drops just 2 or 3 points, if it's suddenly 55% Republican and 45% Democrat, you won't see conservatives winning a presidential race in the rest of our lifetime.
Wow.
And so we are literally taking from a Republican standpoint, our most reliable voting bloc and starting to give them behavior patterns that
Right.
our least reliable voting bloc has.
Right. Right. Because when you look back at, and that makes total sense, if you look back on the history of our country, like with President Johnson's war on poverty, there were communities in our country that were thriving before that was implemented. And that was implemented with very nefarious intentions towards specific communities in our country in order to subjugate them. Because as Gary even said about the school choice here in Tennessee, once you have acclimated to that assistance, you build your life around it. And then you no longer see a need to make any changes. You no longer see a need to strive for anything different. You become comfortable, and that's it. They've got you. They've got you. So we see this as
you're ultimately paying for it.
Yes, yes. We see this the same way that you do, in that we absolutely have to. We were very surprised at the kind of success we had last session, keeping these pieces of legislation at bay. And ultimately, it came down to differences between our House and Senate bodies.
Sure.
They could not get on the same page with particular specificity to access to the vouchers from illegal immigrant children because of Plyler versus Doe. And the Senate, went, well, there's nothing we can do about it. But the House was like, yeah, but the problem is we've got constituents who do not want these dollars to be just, handed out to children of illegal immigrants. And so they could never satisfy that argument on either side. And then time was a ticking and they could never get it done. And then, of course, we also had just some really solid rock rib conservatives that put their foot down and said, no, I'm not voting for this no matter what you do to it because it's wrong. And it allows an eventual one of our reps, which maybe you can answer this. One of our reps, and he's a good guy, but he's for vouchers. And I've asked him, here's the problem in that if we allow this piece of this legislation to be implemented in Tennessee, how can you guarantee me that some future General Assembly is not going to promulgate some rules or change the legislation in a way where it does do things that you're promising me you won't do? How do I
Yeah.
get someone who says things like that? It's almost like when I say to him, are you going to speak for a future General Assembly? He kind of just goes, la, 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 like he doesn't want to hear the question.
Yeah.
But is there
I'm
something
old
I could
enough to remember.
say?
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when Colorado was a solid red state.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, I try to bring that up as I remember when Colorado was a solid red state. You remember that? And it's like, yeah, so what happens if Tennessee turns blue? And then they always, or something like
Yeah.
that. And they're always like, well, then the future voters voted for it and there's nothing I could do about it. It's
That.
like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, It's like, so you put in legislation that I'm telling you is bad. And when bad things happen, you're going to deny any responsibility for it.
Yeah.
And, um, and don't you believe in small government? I mean, if we want government that's limited in our
Yeah.
country or in our state, and
Yeah.
that's the other thing is like school choice is the biggest expansion of state government in my
Yeah.
lifetime,
Yes.
other than states that have added Medicaid and Medicare,
Okay.
which has been a complete disaster here in North Carolina.
So explain that a little bit, how it's an even bigger expansion than even those healthcare provisions,
Or,
because
well, I
a
think
lot
it's
of people don't
smaller than the
understand that.
healthcare. Yeah, it's a little bit smaller than the healthcare. I mean, you're talking
Yeah.
about hundreds of millions or billions of
Mm-hmm.
dollars of the government now
Yes.
bringing its force, its power into the market and into your state. So,
Yeah.
like if the state currently is, they're having to hire more employees to manage the program, or they're outsourcing it to a nonprofit or for-profit who are making their donors or their owners tons of money while your kids tuition gets raised at the local private school because you've got
Yeah.
all this new money that they know you have, and now
Yeah.
they can offer a lazy Susan pool around the building or something productive like that,
Yeah.
like they did in the colleges. So yes, so the budget itself is expanding almost permanently. The amount of bureaucrats in your state are going to expand
Yeah.
permanently, and their control over just the life of your state, people in the state, is going to increase. But not even that, it's the normalization of it.
Yes.
Where you've got, this 10% of your populace who's would be against all sorts of different other welfare schemes
Yeah.
are now embracing this one.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
that's the greater long-term concern for us.
Yeah, I think that's the frustration with a lot of people here, is that you are willing to see what's true unless it means you don't get your piece of government cheese. And that
Yeah,
is hypocrisy. So
for sure.
that frustrates us. Although we have managed to get the message out in at least enough of an impactful way this last session. But it's going to be a dogfight this coming session. And so I wanted to bring people like you here to have conversations about this and really help people to see with some clarity what it is that we're really, what we're really dealing with.
Yeah, and they also, the whole teacher union thing,
Yeah.
that's really if you are in any of these behind the scene meetings, they're like, we gotta get rid of the teachers unions, they're evil. That's the real reason we're doing all this. Is every single one of these bills that have passed has
Yeah.
given more money to the teachers unions and more money to the public schools.
Yeah.
And so that's the compromise they're making to get these bills to pass, is they're actually giving the teachers unions more power
Yeah.
through the bills.
Yeah.
And you're look, I don't know how Tennessee is, like North Carolina, they're part-time legislators, right?
Yeah.
That's not
It's the
to do this
same
full
here.
time.
Yeah.
They're not paid to do it full time,
Mm.
anything like that. And so they rely on these kind of big voices. And that's the thing, whenever I talk to, like AFP or some of these other ones and their leadership, I'm like, even some of them, they say, we don't know what's going to work. This is just our best guess. This is our best try. We're going to try this. And if it doesn't work, then we'll try
Yeah.
something else.
Well,
And
I
I'm
will.
always like, that is, as like, you would not take this philosophy to any
Right.
of your other key ideas, right?
Yeah.
You're not pushing for single payer healthcare.
No.
You're against that,
Yeah.
right? But you're pushing
Mm-hmm.
single payer education.
Yeah. It just doesn't.
As I was like, I have sins in my life. I have contradictions in my life. I am not smart enough to hold those two contradictions
Yeah.
and feel whole in my soul.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. We have a group here in Tennessee that are particularly aggressive as far as AFP is concerned.
Sure.
They dislike us with a flaming passion.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any intention of trying to, hey, we don't understand why you guys are so against this. It's just, we're going to win and we're going to resort to unseemly tactics in order to do so, like putting out flyers, just the most vile flyers about one of our most conservative representatives down in the southern part of Williamson County. He's one of our best guys. They had a phone bank, they had flyers, they were telling lies. I mean, we'll just call them what they are about him, and sort of characterizing him in a way that was not only untrue, but it was just it was so intentionally mean.
Yeah.
They just want to win. It's just about winning. It's not about what's best for the kids. It's about
Yep.
achieving an objective. And so there's just no dealing with these people in a way that is
Yeah.
civilized. So, and then we've
Yeah.
got Club for Growth that was also involved here. And we've also
Yeah.
got the American Federation for Children. So, I mean, you get a
And
name
they're
like
all
Betsy
funded by the
DeVos.
same people.
Yes, yes, yes. But
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't know that they don't. I mean, Class Wallet's a private organization,
yeah,
and they don't have to release who their donors are or who their benefactors are. But it would not surprise me if she's one of them, because whoever owns that company is, I mean, let's just conversations. We have 100,000 students in the United States. If every single one of those students got $7,000 a year from the state, we could
wow,
say, hey, Classical Conversations is free,
yeah,
and we'll help you fill out this paperwork, and we get that $7,000. We would go from an organization that's doing well,
yeah,
well less than 100 million, a little bit better than 10 million a year, to a $700 million a year company.
yeah,
In theory, we'd have, we would need to hire 5 or 6 more people to deal with it,
yeah.
but our expenses wouldn't go up
No,
$700 million.
no, you'd just be
And
rolling in money.
I could be getting rich, right?
Yeah,
I would just be rolling in money. I could be flying around in my private jets and not
yeah,
worrying about income inequality, because I would be redistributing wealth
yeah,
from all of you who are listening into
yeah,
my own pocket,
yep.
money that you wouldn't freely give me. But I have been able to convince the state
Yep.
to tell you, if you do not pay your taxes, I'll throw you in jail. I'll repossess your house, and I'm going to give that money to Robert Bortins. But obviously, I can't give it directly to Robert.
No.
So I'll give it to your kid who
Yeah.
will then give it to Robert.
So that's a great point. So ultimately, what we're talking about is one giant money laundering scheme. That's what it sounds like.
Basically, it is.
That is just
No,
unbelievable.
it's a
So,
laundering. It's a money laundering scheme for our side because the current
yes,
team is laundering money to their side,
yes, yes. But that
and that's
just
how a
that
lot of people look at it.
but that just shows you right there. So, and here's a question about the upcoming election because you've got President Trump who clearly has been he's very insulated. So he is surrounded by people who obviously benefit from this scheme and been convinced that, oh, well, it's freedom of choice. It's more freedom. And he would want freedom of choice, but he clearly doesn't understand this
Sure.
issue on a granular level. So if we ever had the ear of the president, what would be the best way to explain it to him as a businessman where he would go, wait a minute, that's not conservative. This isn't something that would benefit the American people.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump's definitely a populist. But
Yeah.
he, I mean, the hard part is, luckily, the federal government has very little to do, and it is more of a state
Yes.
issue.
Yes.
So, but he does have the bully pulpit, and
He does.
obviously, he's using it to advocate for school choice.
Yeah.
Um, and I would talk to him because he is big on removing barriers
Yeah.
and removing red tape.
Yeah.
And Carrie McDonald, she's the head of FEE, and she's pushing school choice. At one of these meetings that I was with her, she was like, "We just got school choice in Iowa. The only problem is it's impossible to start new schools in Iowa because the red tape is so much."
Wow. So
Like,
it doesn't
okay,
really
so
matter. Right. So it doesn't
it's
really
like,
matter. It's like,
would not have the conservative policy been, let's cut red tape and see if that works instead of
yeah,
subsidizing something that can't even happen.
right.
Um, and so, I mean, I think for, President Trump does really understand economics very well. He
Yeah.
understands, the benefits and cons
Yeah.
of different economic systems. So I would definitely talk to him about uh, making sure that people are free to do what they want to, which would be the first step, I think, of course, getting rid of the Department of Education,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
then making sure that states make it easier to start private schools,
Yeah.
form homeschools for parents to, educate other people inside their households or
Yeah.
at, I mean, what we need is policy to make people free again
Yeah.
and being able to make their own choices. And I think he really does want to cut out bureaucracy.
Yes.
And so I'd explain to him how these programs are actually increasing bureaucracy and not decreasing them, show them how they're blowing up state budgets, which means taxes are going to have to be increased,
Yeah.
and then talking to them just about what true freedom looks like. And I think, I like to tell people I'm for school choice. I'm just against the government paying for that choice.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of governments can do to make it easier for people to start schools and get them funded and things of that nature that doesn't require the redistribution of wealth or more taxes. And so I got an idea. Let's try those things first.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, thank you so very much for being with me today. Is there anything else that you would want our readers to know that they can carry with them to try and combat this issue since we do know we are in for a fight?
Yeah, I mean, I think I will just say from my behind the scenes conversations that we are starting to turn. And so it's that tireless, irate minority that are going to
Yeah,
help keep fighting this. And if you can, every time you delay it 2 years,
yeah,
more and more bad things are coming up, and
yeah,
more legislators, like I've even hearing in Texas,
yeah,
at first they wanted to go full Arizona, and
yeah,
now they're really, really bringing it back down.
yeah.
So remember, whatever the fight is, like the more you can gump and muck it up, the
Yes.
better.
Okay.
And then there's always a new legislative session.
Yeah.
And so we
Yeah.
can, so whatever bad laws they do here, don't get disappointed. Let's just
Right.
try again later, and just keep educating people, because
Yeah.
once you know, I think you have a responsibility to tell other people and to not
Absolutely.
remain quiet. And
Yeah.
I've been able to convince other people to drop it, but it's very hard work because we've got all the talking heads. But even
Yes.
people like Charlie Kirk, who's promoting this and promoting charter schools,
Yeah.
he said on a podcast a couple weeks ago that he would not actually take the money himself, even though he lives in Arizona.
Yeah.
So I think some people are starting to understand that this isn't the silver bullet that they thought it
Right.
was. And the other thing is, they think that it's going to help them win elections.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was because of Glenn Youngkin winning in Virginia.
Right.
But the very next election, the Republicans got their butt whooped
Yes.
in Virginia. And
Yeah.
so it's really not something that's going to prolong your career in the
Right.
legislature, passing these rules.
No.
And you might just start getting homeschoolers and Christians
Yep.
who are concerned about the future of our country leaving your place
Yep.
blank, or thinking that, hey, maybe it's time to vote Democrats. Having a Democrat here for 2 years might not be as bad as having our country
Well,
destroyed forever because we embraced Marxism on our side.
right. We actually
I'm not saying
were
we're there yet, but we might get there.
we actually were Democrat run, I think up until about 98 or so.
Yeah,
And then we flipped the state red. But
right.
with the shift of the party even further right, now what we have here in at least Williamson County is a dogfight, or I call it a turf war, because I really believe that that's how the establishment Republicans who live here see it. They do not, they've
Mhm.
just, I mean, they've had the power now for about 15, 18 years, and they just figured out how to get this to work for them. They were not
Mhm.
enamored of the idea of these grassroots conservatives coming in and stealing their turf. So we're not just fighting really the left as much as we are our own party most of the
Yeah,
time. And it's
and
because
that's
they're greedy. I mean, that's
yeah.
greedy and
Oh,
it's
yeah, they're
about
making
power.
themselves rich off the government and taxpayers'
Yes.
dollars. The
Yes.
other thing that we're seeing, like in Missouri, that well, is they're starting local Republican parties and voting school choice off the Republican platform. And
Oh,
so, I mean, that's obviously another long game. But
yeah.
if you get involved in local politics, and then you can get elected to represent yourself at the party caucuses and stuff, where
Yeah.
they decide what is going to be on the platform, that might be that's what we've seen work best so far. And the other thing is just try to gum it up, and so it doesn't get out of
Yeah.
that election and just goes
Yeah.
2 years later. But I mean, we're seeing the school choice groups. I mean, they spent like $20 million in Texas getting rid of good
Yep.
conservative lawyers to
Yeah.
get somebody that's going to for one thing that they like and a bunch of bad bills. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's very
We
disheartening.
we had
But keep
5
up the good
point.
work.
Thank you. We had 5.4 million spent here, and we had a couple of wins, but one of those wins was in a race that really the only thing that tipped the scale was a Trump endorsement, because in that race for the incumbent, almost $875,000 was spent on that incumbent, and it took a Trump endorsement to eke out a 5-point win for that race. So we know we're up against, but we're a hardy bunch.
Just so
We
people,
aren't going to quit. So
you and I know these numbers, but our audience might not know. 875,000. So in the Republican House races in North Carolina,
mhm.
the average person raises $90,000 on the Republican side and about 75,000 on the Democrat side here
Yeah.
in North Carolina on average.
Yeah.
And so they just dumped 10 times that amount of money into one race
Yep.
to defeat a conservative. And in
Yes.
Texas, I mean, they were spending $5 million on single races, on
Wow.
races and I think this might fundraise a little bit higher than that,
Yeah.
than we have in North Carolina. But even if it's like an average of $250,000 or $500,000, again,
Yeah.
they're dumping 10 times the amount of normal money in there to get someone elected that's going to do their bidding.
Yep. Exactly. And not the people's, which is the point of representative government, is to do
Yep.
the will of the people. So, well, thank you so much, Robert. I really appreciate this discussion. It was really great. I think it's going to help people to understand the truth about about the voucher program and the legislation, and having a better understanding of what it is exactly, which is essentially just, like you said, a redistribution of wealth, not your tax dollars working for you.
No. Well, thank you so much. And
Yes.
yeah, stay free.
Yes, thank you. We will. You have a great day.